Chris Sewall here, baseball card collector, investor, dealer, in that order. Welcome everyone. Story time today from the files of Adventures in Card Dealing. Haven't done one of these in quite a while. I've sort of been saving a few of them for a rainy day. I guess we'll call this a rainy day. But it's a story of a large purchase we made out of Chicago that had quite, a couple sort of twists and turns along the way and some funny little tidbits that came out of it. For this collection, I was partnering with Jeremy Donson, the man, the myth, the legend, the Texas Snowman himself. And in past deals, usually our arrangement was that Jeremy pays for the deal, I sell the collection, and then he gets paid back first, and then we split any profit over that. We had a slightly different arrangement for this one, which I'll get into, and we'll share a little bit about how we did at the end. So it's February of 2022, and roughly 2 years ago, and I got an email from a gentleman who lived in the Chicago area, and he had heard about me, or he knew about me through the channel, and he said he had a very, very large collection he was looking to sell. Now, I was living in the Netherlands at the time. However, I flew into the States quite regularly. And when I would fly into the States, I usually go to the D.C. area because that's where my parents live. So I'd sort of go stay with them. And D.C. to Chicago is about a 10-hour drive. It was going to make more sense to drive to this collection than to fly, as it was a very bulky collection that would have been extremely expensive and tricky to ship. I spoke with the gentleman on the phone and asked him to send some pictures up front just so we get a sense if this is going to be worth a trip out to Chicago. And he sent some pictures of his most valuable cards, which were in wall display cases. And these are the actual pictures that some of the actual pictures that he sent. Obviously, tremendous value here. He said he was asking $75,000 for the entire collection, which I couldn't assess from the pictures, but certainly seemed possible. So I called up Jeremy. We had a couple three-way phone calls with the gentleman, and both Jeremy and I agreed that the price, again, not something we could assess from the pictures, but it seemed possible. And the gentleman seemed very, very reasonable. So this seemed like a no-brainer to go out to Chicago and hopefully get a deal done. Now, like I said, this was a very large collection. It was sort of a healthy mix of modern and vintage. The modern was more of the bulky stuff, although it had plenty of value. But the real value was in the graded vintage cards. Here are just some of the more valuable ones. You can see a bunch of early year Mickey Mantles. There's a 52 Topps Willie Mays, a couple of Michael Jordan rookies in sort of low to mid grade. Jackie Robinson, there was a bunch of pre-war. Here's a Lou Gehrig 33 Goudey, Hank Aaron rookie, PSA 2, etc., etc., etc. So we agree that I'm going to drive up on a Wednesday, get a hotel nearby, and then go to the gentleman's house first thing Thursday morning. Jeremy was not going to come into this deal, but I was going to go through the cards all day. Jeremy was going to be available the whole time I'm there by text and phone call if needed. And assuming we agree on a price, I was going to go to the bank. There was a branch of my bank very close by. Pull out the cash and pay him and take the cards. And to be prepared for all this, Jeremy deposited $75,000 into my bank account. And we called that branch ahead of time and said, hey, just be aware that we may be withdrawing up to $75,000 on this particular day. So please make sure that cash is available. And all that was set up ahead of time. So I'm driving up, and remember, it's a 10-hour plus drive for me. And word comes in that there's going to be a heavy snowstorm the following day, the day that I'm going to look at the collection. And by heavy snowstorm, I mean one you would not be able to drive in. And it's supposed to hit the area around noon. So this is a pretty big, wrench in the plan in the sense that, the idea was I was going to get there in the morning, spend all day looking at the collection. Finish up around, let's say 3 or 4. Assuming we come to a price, I would, go to the bank, pull out the cash, bring it back, pay him. And then we would load up the car. And then, maybe I would leave his place by, let's say 6 p.m., something like that. Head home, get a hotel halfway, but obviously none of this was going to be possible if the snowstorm hit around noon. So I called the gentleman and say, hey, can I come a little earlier? Instead of coming at 9, can I come at 8 a.m.? And he says, fine. And that helps a little bit, but that's not going to really solve the problem. So I called Jeremy to see if there's other ways we can save time. We come up with 2 ideas. First is that as I'm assessing the collection, I'll take pictures of some of the cards and text them to Jeremy, and Jeremy will price those cards out while I price out the other stuff. And that way we can sort of go twice as fast. And the other idea is that I should pull the cash out up front, and so I won't have to do it later. And I'm a little uncomfortable with this, bringing that much cash to a stranger's house. But we had spoken to him many times on the phone already. He came across as perfectly safe and reasonable. And on top of that, he wasn't going to know that I had the cash on me. So with all that, I was okay with it. He had said he only wanted to do a cash deal, so that was something we can do to save some time. I had with me a winter coat since it's the middle of winter, going to Chicago. And the coat had a whole bunch of pockets, on the insides and up here and, down in the pocket area. And all the pockets were zipper pockets. So when I pulled out the cash, I broke it into various smaller stacks and put each stack, a stack into each pocket. And I think there were a total of 6 or 7 pockets. And, $75,000 cash is actually not as big a stack as you might think, or at least I remember the first time I saw that sort of money in cash, I was surprised at how small a stack it was of $100 bills. It actually easily fit into, that many pockets without you being even able to tell. So that's how I walked into the house with this coat on full of cash throughout the pockets. And I kept the coat on the entire time, which probably seemed a little weird, but it was the middle of winter, so I think it was reasonable. But the gentleman was extremely friendly. He was there with two family members. They actually served me breakfast and made me a cup of tea, and we had a really, really nice chat. And then maybe about an hour in, I said, this is really pleasant, but I actually really need to get moving here because I'm worried about the storm. So I sort of texted Jeremy, and we got started. The collection was basically as described, a ton of goodies, roughly 1,000 graded cards, a lot of great stuff. There was also a room full of cards that had sort of a varying mix of things, a lot of junk wax era stuff with very, very little value, but also some nice sets and boxes of, random goodies and some vintage and some modern and memorabilia and things like that. So I started doing my thing and pricing out the collection, and as discussed, I start texting Jeremy pictures for him to price, and here's an example of a picture I sent him. These 10 cards, Jeremy would price out these 10 cards, while I priced out other cards. He would keep a running tally of his stuff, I would keep a running tally of my stuff, and obviously at the end, we would add them together. In terms of efficiency, this was maybe the most impressive job we ever did in terms of pricing out a collection, as this was a massive collection, and we were working as a team to price this out very, very quickly and accurately, which we did, and we had to do because the snowstorm was coming. It was still set to show up around noon. And so when we finally did, I went to the gentleman and said, hey, do you mind if I go have a private conversation with Jeremy, and then we can come in and discuss numbers? And he said, of course, that was fine. So Jeremy and I start discussing everything, adding up numbers, tallying everything, trying to figure out what we can pay. And we decided that $75K is really, really too high. We would be more comfortable around $60,000. That, at that price, we thought that was a very fair price. And at the same time, we could make a little bit of profit on it. So we decided that we're going to go in and offer the gentleman $55,000. So Jeremy wants to do the negotiating. I mean, it's his money. So we go into the room and put Jeremy on speaker. And Jeremy says, we can offer you $55,000. And the gentleman has sort of a weird reaction. He pauses for a second and then really quickly stands up and says, let me go see something. And he leaves the room real fast. And I wasn't really sure how to read that in the moment. But, I just sort of make small talk with Jeremy on the phone for a little bit. And he comes back a minute or two later and says, you know what? I would be comfortable at $63,000. And Jeremy says, well, you're at 63, we're at 55. Why don't we meet in the middle, which in this case would be exactly $59,000. And the gentleman says, sure, that would be great. We shake hands, and I can tell, he's happy with the deal. So it's now about noon, and the snow has just started to fall. The gentleman says, okay, you want to run to the bank? And I said, actually, you know what? I don't need to. I brought the cash with me. He says, oh, wow, really? What, is it out in the car? And I said, nope. I want to see a magic trick, and I open up a pocket and I pull out a stack of cash, and then I do this 6 or 7 times in total, and he thinks this is the funniest thing ever, whereas I got to feel like a total baller in the moment. So we count out the cash, I pay him, and now it's time to start loading the car, and this proves to be a lot more time consuming than I had considered. There are about 25 of these display cases, maybe something like that, scattered throughout the house, and we didn't have a box to put the cards in, and I couldn't fit the display cases in my card. So we had to go through each one, pull out every card, and then put them somewhere. So we were finding random boxes and box lids to stack up cards on, and then I was trying to figure out how to Tetris them into my car so that they were safe. Meanwhile, I also was starting to pack up the bulk, and the bulk was very bulky, and it filled up the entire back seat of my car. It then filled up the entire trunk, and it then filled up the entire passenger seat to the point where there was really no more room left to put anything into the car. Now, I'd already put everything of value, but there was a few sort of bulky items I had to leave behind, and he was, fine with that, obviously, given the circumstances. But this whole process took a whole lot longer than I thought. So by the time I leave his house, it's maybe 3 o'clock, and by then the snow had just created this icy, wintry, undrivable situation. I think I got about a mile away from his house, and I was driving 10 miles an hour on a 4-lane road, and it was still not safe. I was sliding all over the place. And I quickly realized there was no way I was going to get out of Chicago that day. So I pulled over to the side, and I figured out where the nearest hotel was, and it was something 2 miles away. And it took me 45 minutes to drive the 2 miles to the nearest hotel just because of the awful driving conditions, and there were actually a bunch of accidents along the way. Keep in mind the car is completely full, and cards are very heavy, so it's riding very low, which just sort of adds to the difficulty of driving on icy roads. But I make up to the hotel, I pull up and park, and I can't tell you how full the car was. Like, the car was full in all directions. There was cards under my feet. There was cards, crammed in every little corner. And I couldn't just leave them in the car. So I just, I went in, I booked a room, and I came out to start loading all the cards up to the room, which was going to, be quite the project for one person. It took, I don't know, something like 20 trips. But the first time I opened the door to the back seat, cards just fell out onto the snow because they had just been shoved in so much. Luckily, the cards that fell into the snow were some of the cheaper junk wax stuff that didn't have much value. This is the actual hotel I stayed at. Now, this is a day or two after the storm, so the conditions don't look so bad here. But yeah, it was much worse when I arrived. And here's where my car was parked in the parking lot. And yeah, you can see I still had my Jedi braid back then in the shadow. So now I'm in the hotel room with just, cards everywhere. Like, you can barely walk around the room. There's just piles of cards everywhere. And it's maybe 6 p.m. or so. Now, normally with a collection like this, I would sort of piece it out, sell everything one by one, and try to get sort of max value over time. And that would have been a really fun thing to do with this collection because there was a ton of great stuff in it. But in this particular case, we couldn't really do that for a couple reasons. The main reason was because I was living in the Netherlands, and selling this collection from the Netherlands, that just wasn't, getting the cards there alone would have been near impossible. And then selling it from there is just not efficient. Cards, shipping's very expensive. Shipping time's very slow. A lot of people just refuse to buy from overseas. So that made no sense. And Jeremy had a full-time job that was not card related, so he couldn't sell it. And this was obviously way too much money to just sort of sit on until we get around to it later. So we needed to flip a chunk of it to to a buyer, and we had that buyer lined up ahead of time. It was a contact Jeremy had. Now, flipping is not something I generally do. It's just not part of my overall selling strategy, except sort of in rare cases such as this one. But like I mentioned, we sort of had to in this case. So I'm stuck in my hotel room for a day and a half, basically nothing to do. So I decided I'll go ahead and make an Excel spreadsheet with all the cards we're open to flipping. And we had already priced out the cards when we bought it, but I decided to put it in an organized manner so that I could send it to Jeremy and he could negotiate with this other buyer, that part. Because this all had to happen quite fast as I was leaving for the Netherlands in, I don't know, a week or so. And we needed to sell a large chunk of this before I left. So I finished the spreadsheet that night, leaving out stuff that I wanted to keep and stuff Jeremy wanted to keep and some other stuff I wanted to sell off individually. Sent the spreadsheet over to Jeremy, and he was able to negotiate with the buyer while I was in the hotel room a price for a large chunk of the collection. It was either that night or I think it was the following day, actually. And, 2 days after I arrived, the snow had cleared enough and I was able to drive home. And I was able to meet the buyer in person as he was sort of local to me in the East Coast. And we did a deal for a large chunk of the collection. So it was actually quite a quick flip on the majority of the collection. I don't have the exact financials on this deal as we weren't keeping specific records on it. And it actually was combined with another deal when we went to sell to the second buyer. So I don't actually know exactly how we did on it. This is sort of my best guess here. We spent $59,000 on the collection and had about $570 worth of expenses. The expenses were, basically 2 nights hotel and a bunch of gas. We sold the vast majority of the collection to the second buyer for roughly $64,000. I kept about $4,500 worth of bulk. This is stuff the second buyer wasn't interested in. And yeah, I like bulk, it's something I enjoy and generally pretty good at getting max value out of. So that was something I kept, but I didn't get around to selling it till a long time later because it wasn't something I could bring with me to the Netherlands. Both Jeremy and I pulled out $6,000 worth of cards to keep, mainly for our PCs. Jeremy kept this card here, 1952 Topps Jackie Robinson PSA 2. It was the most valuable card in the collection, and at the time was selling for about $6,000. Jeremy kept this card for his PC. And I kept these 10 cards here, also added up to about $6,000 worth of value at the time. They're basically all rookie cards. The Gordie Howe's the second year, the Michael Jordan's the second year, and the Bobby Orr is, I believe, a third year. Everything else is a rookie, and I still have a bunch of these. Still have the Hoyt Wilhelm in the upper left. I still have the 2 1935 football cards in the upper right, and maybe a couple of others. I sold a few of them, but I still have quite a few of these as well as a part of my PC. If you wanted to isolate either Jeremy or me, and again, remember, this is all just sort of estimated, these numbers, but Jeremy made about $4,500 cash, and it kept about $6,000 worth of cards, the Jackie Robinson, and I netted about $10,500 worth of cards, some of which were PC stuff, and some of which, I ultimately sold. There was definitely a lot of money left on the table here because we flipped the majority of it instead of piecing it out, but again, that was sort of, our best option at the time, based on the circumstances. Today, for example, now that I'm back in the States, we would not be flipping a collection such as this. But that's it for this very exciting Chicago deal. Thank you very much to the gentleman for selling us your incredible collection, and thank you all of you for watching. Hope everyone enjoyed. Thanks everyone.